Hello and welcome to day number 5 of week 2 as we wrap up this second week of our look at the Bible throughout the entire year. Today we're going to go through Genesis 26 and 27 and Mark chapter 10. If you want to go ahead and pause here and go read those and come back. Genesis 26 and 27, we kind of continue the story of Isaac. Isaac is now the main character as we go forward in this story of the Abraham line. And we see this interesting story again in chapter 26 of Isaac and Abimelech. And of course, this goes back to is very similar to when Abraham kind of pulled the same things with Abimelech. And Abimelech it's not the same person. Abimelech is just a royal name. Think like Pharaoh. You know, we use the term Pharaoh to refer to all sorts of different men and women that led Egypt, and Abimelech is kind of the same idea. So when we see Abimelech throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Bible, that it is more of a term for a royal person. So not necessarily a single person. Abraham is a single person. Isaac is a single person. Abimelech is kind of a greater term for a royal. But this story is very similar. Isaac, and tells Rebecca, his wife, to act and tell people that he is, or she is, his sister. And this is very similar to what Abraham did with Sarah, and even in the same area, Gerar. And Abraham did the same thing with Sarah in Egypt as well. So kind of, and it's, again, we look at it and we read it in weird content, in our modern context, and it's, totally different than how they would have read it in the first generations of reading this. But really, this is setting up the family line in this area of Gerar. Isaac is sent off to this new area, and again, it's just one of those things of obeying God and going where God tells you to go. And then chapter 27 deals with the blessing of Jacob instead of Esau. Of course, Esau and Jacob were twins, born to Isaac and Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn, and if you remember, Jacob comes out holding on to his heel. And Jacob, some of the definitions of the name Jacob is deceiver and cheater, and we kind of see that in this chapter. This chapter starts off with saying that Isaac is old and he's hard of seeing, and he doesn't see very well. Doesn't give an age, that I can see. Not that it matters, but he's just old and he can't see very well. So he knows he's on his, kind of on his last legs, and so he wants to give his blessing. He's a wealthy man. He wants to give his blessing to his oldest son, and of course, in this culture, and as in a lot of cultures, the oldest son gets a vast majority of the of everything. They are the main heir, So Esau is scheduled to get, a vast majority of the wealth and the land and the animals and the people. And Jacob, of course, would be given a, pittance or whatever. He would get something, but not as much, of course, as Esau. And this is a very common thing, but we see this happen a few times especially in Genesis. We'll see it again later in Genesis. Something very similar. So we see that Jacob, or Rebekah, hears that Isaac is going to give Esau his blessings. So she of course favors Jacob. Jacob is the one that stays at home and is around the house and does a lot of the home type stuff, where Esau is more out in the fields and out hunting and out doing all of that kind of stuff. Rebecca hears Isaac say these things, and she decides, I'd rather have Jacob have this blessing than Esau. And so she dresses Jacob up in the hairy clothes and gives him all the, makes the dinner and all these things. And Jacob goes, presents it, flat out lies to his father, saying that he is Esau. And, and you see it that Isaac kind of has a hint that, hey, this doesn't seem like Esau, right? And but Jacob reassures him, no, I am your firstborn, Esau. And so Isaac gives him this great blessing and all these things, and says, let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. That's a powerful language that Isaac uses to bless Jacob, thinking he is, of course, blessing Esau. And then, of course, Esau comes in, realizes what has happened, and rightfully freaks out, as anybody would have done. And but Isaac has already done what he's done. He's already given his blessing, and he tells Esau in verse 39 and 40, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. And so Isaac tells these things to Esau, and Esau, of course, again, is rightfully very upset with his brother, says he's going to kill his brother and all these things. So when I read this, and I read that he's going to be away from the dew of heaven, and he's going to be out, Esau goes outside of what we would think of Israel. He goes onto the east side of the Jordan River and settles there. And through his line are the Edomites, which we come across throughout the Old Testament. And of course, we're not totally done with Esau in the story of Jacob and Esau. But this is, again, we look at that this culture, greatly, the oldest son greatly benefits. And we see this a couple times where God, in his sovereignty, says, I know this is how the culture is, or how the culture wants to be, but this is how I'm going to do it. I want Jacob to be. Jacob is where my line comes from, and where this faith is going to grow and blossom, not through Esau, even though that is the cultural norm. So it's God's sovereignty, and God, kind of saying, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to make Jacob be, the main character, if you will. And so it's just, another, we look at these things, and we look at it a little deeper. It's just God saying, hey, this is my plan. It has nothing to do with the plans of man. So great example of that early on there in Genesis. Flip back to Mark chapter 10. A lot, of course, going on in Mark chapter 10, is there's a lot going on throughout all of Mark. We see this early on, the teaching about divorce. And we're going to get more into this. Matthew goes into this much more in detail about biblical divorce. And so when we get to that point, we'll discuss that way more in depth. There is, of course, stipulations for being granted a divorce that are biblical, and but again, it just comes back to that first God's call for man to leave his house and take his wife, and the two become one. That is kind of the whole point, and that is the point of divorce, and not allowing rampant divorce like there was at this time in Jewish culture. So, and again, then he goes back and he hits on this again, and I think it's very important on the children, coming to him. And again, I think we talked about it before, that at this time, children were very much seen and not heard, and children were, they were just not a part of the church. Obviously it's not a church at this point, but they're not really part of society until they hit the age of 13 and they, become adults. So Jesus is really going away from the cultural norms. Again, this is something that God does all the time. He goes against the cultural norms, and we see this with children, and we see this with women too. We'll get into that as we get into some of the other stories shared in the Gospels about women. But Jesus is very much saying, no, these are mine, and and we see that the faith like a child. If we all had the faith like the child. Then the story of the rich young man, and really this is, when Jesus says that in verse 23, and Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, how difficult it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. And when we look at this, we can take it for face value that the wealthy people are not going to heaven. That is not the case. Having wealth is not necessarily an issue. It's what you do with that wealth. And a lot of times wealth breeds other sins, correct? Right? So you see the sins of greed and gluttony and all these other things that wealth can lead to. It's a matter of what you are doing with your wealth, and that's what when the rich young man comes up to Jesus and says, "I would like to, enter into the kingdom," and all these things, and Jesus says, "Give your money away," right? Give your money away. Help out the poor. Help out this. Help out that. And the young man really has a hard time with that because he has this large, he is very wealthy, and he doesn't want to get rid of that. And it's about giving God control, right? Giving God control and not being so based on your wealth and your status on earth. So that's where we get to do that. Of course, Jesus, for the third time, talks about his upcoming death, and we see this story of James and John, the brothers, the sons of Zebedee, that they want to sit at the right hand of God the Father when they get to heaven. And of course, sitting at Jesus' right hand is a place of great importance. And Jesus says, "But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." God's already got it set on who's going to be where and doing whatever in heaven. And so, but one of the interesting stories is, or the takeaway from this is that the other 10, they get rightfully upset. They're like, "Who are you guys to go say that you want to sit at Jesus' right hand? What if we want to sit at Jesus' right hand? Are you any better than me?" No, of course not. And the point that Jesus makes here at the end of it, verse 43. "But it shall not be so among you, but for whoever would be great among you must first be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And the point here is is surrendering. Your life is not your life. My life is not my life. My life belongs to Jesus Christ, and I am to do his will, and that means serving, and that means you go through your hard times, you go through your struggles, and you need to humble yourself to the lowest position out there. And of course, we see the term servants and slaves, and it's being willing to be a servant rather than a master, and that is kind of the important things. And we see that in Jesus' life. Jesus, who is God, comes down to earth and takes on a human life and is a servant. We see this when we get into Passover and into the Holy Week, when he washes his disciples' feet and things like that. He is a servant, and we are servants, and that is kind of the point there. So good stuff here to end week number 2. As we start next week, we will be in Genesis 28, verse 28 and 29, and we're also going to be in Mark chapter 11. So look forward to have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.